There are places on Earth where silence is more dangerous than noise, where the absence of birdsong, the hush of wind, and the stillness of the air don't bring peace, but a creeping sense of dread. In these places, the quiet isn't empty, it's waiting. And sometimes, if you listen closely, you'll hear something that was never meant for human ears. That's where this story begins. Not with a battle, not with a hero, but with a sound that changed everything. Most people will never know what happened in the Amazon rainforest in 1967. The official records are gone, the names erased, the coordinates wiped from every map. But for the few who survived, the memory is impossible to forget. It starts with a classified mission, a team of 37 men in a base that didn't officially exist. Their orders were simple: monitor Soviet radio traffic, jam enemy communications, and report anything unusual. But what they found was something no one could have prepared for: a transmission that didn't belong to any nation, any language, or even any species we know. Imagine being dropped into the heart of the world's most impenetrable jungle, surrounded by a living wall of green that breathes and presses in on you from every side. The air is thick with decay, the ground squelches beneath your boots, and every hour brings a new reminder that you don't belong here. The jungle is alive, but it's not welcoming. It's watching. And when the noise finally stops, when the birds and insects fall silent, you realize you're not alone. The men who went into that jungle thought they were prepared for anything. They had training, weapons, and discipline. But nothing in their lives had prepared them for the sound that came through the radio that night. It started as a faint pulse, like a heartbeat echoing through static, growing louder and more insistent until it filled the room. Then came the voices, not words, not language, but something that felt human and inhuman at the same time. It was as if the jungle itself was speaking, calling out to anyone who would listen. What happened next would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives. Some say it was a hallucination, a trick of the mind brought on by isolation and fear. Others believe it was something much older, something that had been waiting beneath the earth for centuries, maybe longer. The truth is, no one knows for sure, but the scars are real, and so are the missing men. So this isn't just a story about a failed mission or a forgotten war. It's a warning, because the transmission didn't end in 1967. It's still out there, hidden in the static, waiting for someone else to hear it. And if you ever find yourself in a place where the silence feels heavy, where the patterns on the walls make your head ache, and where the ground hums with a rhythm that matches your own heartbeat, walk away. Don't listen. Don't answer. Because some calls should never be answered. But before you turn away, before you dismiss this as just another ghost story, ask yourself, what if it's true? What if there are things beneath our feet, beneath the surface of the world, that are older and more patient than anything we can imagine? What if the real danger isn't what we can see, but what we can't? The men of Operation Night Harvest learned that lesson the hard way, and now their story is all that's left. A story that was never meant to be told, about a war that never officially happened, and a threat that never really went away. So listen closely, because what you're about to hear isn't just history, it's a warning. And it starts with a sound, a heartbeat in the dark, calling out from the depths of the jungle, waiting for someone to answer the mission. Nobody was supposed to know Operation Night Harvest was never supposed to be remembered. It was designed to vanish, to dissolve into the endless green of the Amazon, leaving no trace behind. The men who were chosen for the mission didn't know that at first. They were told it was routine, just another Cold War assignment, another chess move in a game that spanned continents and cost lives in the shadows. But from the moment they arrived, it was clear that nothing about this operation was routine. The base itself was a secret within a secret. You couldn't find it on any map, not even the classified ones. The coordinates changed with every briefing, as if command was trying to erase the place from memory before anyone had even set foot there. 37 men, all handpicked, all sworn to silence, were flown in under cover of darkness. They landed on a strip of dirt carved out of the jungle, surrounded by razor wire and motion sensors, and were told to forget everything they thought they knew about the world outside. The facility was a prefab maze of metal and plastic, built to be temporary, disposable. It was surrounded on all sides by a living wall of jungle so dense that even the midday sun barely made it through the canopy. The air was thick with moisture, heavy with the scent of rotting vegetation and the constant threat of disease. Every surface sweated, every piece of equipment rusted faster than it could be cleaned. The men worked in shifts, sleeping in bunks that never felt dry, eating rations that tasted of mold and metal, and listening to the endless, maddening noise of the rainforest. But it wasn't the jungle that made the mission strange. It was the secrecy. Orders came down from faceless voices, always changing, always vague. The men were told to monitor Soviet radio traffic, to jam enemy communications, to report anything unusual. But the details never added up. Why here in the middle of nowhere? Why so much security for a listening post? Why the constant reminders that no one outside the base even knew they existed? Captain Elias Kane was the only one who seemed to have any answers, and even he kept his cards close. He was a man carved from discipline, his face set in lines that never softened, his eyes always scanning for threats no one else could see. He told the men to trust the mission, to trust each other, and to trust him. But trust is a fragile thing, especially when you're surrounded by secrets. The men tried to make sense of their orders, to find meaning in the monotony. Some convinced themselves it was just another Cold War bluff, a show of force in a place no one would ever look. Others whispered about black projects, about experiments and cover-ups, about things that happened in the jungle that never made it into the history books. But most just tried to survive, to keep their heads down and their minds occupied, to avoid thinking too hard about the silence that sometimes crept in between the endless noise. The jungle pressed in on them from all sides, a constant reminder that they were intruders in a place that didn't want them. The trees grew so close together that it felt like the forest was breathing, exhaling moistures and decay with every gust of wind. The ground was a patchwork of mud and roots, every step a risk, every shadow a potential threat. The men learned to move quietly, to respect the jungle's rhythms, to listen for the sounds that didn't belong. But even the most seasoned soldiers couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The base felt temporary, like a camp set up for a single night and then abandoned. The equipment failed more often than it worked. Radios crackled with static, and the motion sensors picked up movement that never showed up on the cameras. The men started to see patterns in the chaos, shapes in the undergrowth, flashes of light in the distance, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. And then there were the stories. Sergeant Luis Moreira, the Brazilian army liaison, grew up in villages along the Amazon's tributaries. He knew the jungle in ways the others never could. He respected it, feared it, and warned the others to do the same. He spoke of old legends, of places where the forest swallowed men whole, of sounds that called to you in the night and led you away from the path. The others laughed at first, but as the days dragged on and the jungle grew quieter, the laughter faded. The men began to feel watched, as if the forest itself was studying them, waiting for them to make a mistake. The oppressive heat, the constant damp, the endless noise, it all wore them down, stripping away their bravado and leaving only raw nerves. Some started to dream of the jungle, of roots and vines creeping into their beds, of eyes watching from the darkness. Others stopped sleeping altogether, haunted by the sense that something was coming for them. But through it all, the mission continued. The men monitored the radios, logged every transmission, and waited for orders that never seemed to come. They tried to convince themselves that they were safe, that the base's walls and wires would keep the jungle at bay. But deep down, they knew the truth. They were alone, cut off from the world, surrounded by secrets and shadows. And whatever they were supposed to be watching for, it was already watching them. The sense of isolation grew with every passing day. The men stopped talking about home, stopped counting the days, stopped pretending that they would ever leave the jungle behind. The base became their whole world, a tiny island of light and noise in an ocean of darkness and silence. And as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, the line between reality and nightmare began to blur. It was in this atmosphere of fear and uncertainty that the first sign appeared, a sound that didn't belong, a signal that couldn't be explained. And from that moment on, The mission was no longer about monitoring the enemy. It was about survival. But that's a story for the next section. Because what happened when the signal came through would change everything, and not everyone would make it out alive. The first sign, the impossible signal. It was the kind of night that made you question your own senses. The jungle pressed in on the base, a living wall of darkness and humidity, every leaf and vine glistening with the sweat of the earth. The air was so thick you could almost chew it, and the only light came from the dull red glow of the radio console and the occasional flicker of a cigarette. Most of the men were asleep, lost in uneasy dreams, but a few kept watch, eyes heavy, nerves frayed by weeks of isolation, and the relentless, suffocating noise of the rainforest. I remember the exact moment it started. 0347 hours, October 12th. I was on night watch with Corporal Andrew Dalton, call sign Sparks. He was hunched over the radio, headphones clamped so tight they left red marks on his skin, fingers dancing across the dials in a rhythm only he understood. The equipment hummed, filling the comm room with a steady, comforting static. It was the kind of background noise you learned to love because it meant everything was normal. But that night, normal was about to end. Sparks froze, his hand hovering over a frequency knob, trembling. "You hear that?" he whispered, voice barely audible over the static. I leaned in, straining to catch whatever had caught his attention. At first, it was just more noise, white, formless, meaningless. But then, beneath the static, something else emerged. A pulse, rhythmic, insistent, like a heartbeat echoing through deep space. It was so faint I thought I was imagining it, but as Sparks adjusted the settings, the sound grew clearer, more defined. Not a single heartbeat, but many, layered, syncopated, beating in patterns that made my chest tighten with a fear I couldn't explain. "Interference?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Sparks shook his head, eyes wide. "No, this is deliberate. Someone's broadcasting on a frequency that shouldn't exist." He twisted the dial again, and the pulse grew louder, more urgent. Then, as if summoned by the rhythm, voices began to rise from the static. Not words, not language, just echoes, human-like but wrong, rising and falling like a tide. The sound was hypnotic, almost beautiful, but there was something in it that made my skin crawl. My stomach twisted. "Get Kane," Sparks said, his voice tight with fear. "Get him now." I didn't argue. I ran through the dimly lit corridors, boots thudding on metal grating, and found Captain Elias Kane already awake, uniform buttoned, jaw set in that iron discipline that made him impossible to read. He followed me back to the comm room, listened for 30 seconds, and then keyed the internal comms. "All personnel, alert status Bravo, Sergeant Moreira to comm room immediately." Sergeant Luis Moreira was our guide, a Brazilian army liaison who'd grown up in villages along the Amazon's tributaries. He understood the jungle in ways we never could, respected it, feared it. When he entered the comm room and heard the transmission, his face went pale. "Turn it off," he said quietly, voice tight with something like terror. Kane's eyes narrowed. "Explain." Moreira hesitated, then spoke in a voice that barely carried. "There are stories. Old stories about sounds in the deep forest, sounds that pull you in. You listen too long, you start walking toward them. You don't come back." Sparks yanked the headphones off like they'd burned him, but the sound continued through the speakers, filling the room with that relentless, pulsing rhythm. The heartbeats overlapped, growing faster, until they became a single droning note that seemed to vibrate in my bones. The voices underneath grew louder, almost forming words, but never quite resolving into anything I could understand. It was like listening to a conversation in a language you almost knew, but not quite, familiar enough to be unsettling, alien enough to be terrifying. Kane stared at the console, his face unreadable. "Can you trace the source?" Sparks hesitated, sweat beading on his forehead. "Triangulation will take time, but yeah, if it's close enough." "Do it," Kane ordered. "I want coordinates by 0600. The rest of the night crawled by in a haze of fear and anticipation. Sparks worked the equipment, sweat dripping from his face despite the air conditioning. Moreira paced near the door, muttering prayers under his breath. I stood watch, rifle ready, scanning the perimeter through the window. The motion sensors stayed quiet. The jungle remained silent. That silence was worse than any noise. By dawn, Sparks had coordinates. The signal originated 2 kilometers west-southwest, deep in unmapped territory. Kane assembled a recon team. Me, Moreira, Private Neil Harper on Overwatch, and Dr. Sofia Rojas, the base biologist. She wasn't military, but Kane insisted. If we found something organic, he wanted answers immediately. We geared up in silence, the weight of the unknown pressing down on us. Standard loadout, M16s, sidearms, enough ammo to fight our way back if things went wrong. Harper slung a sniper rifle across his back, scope wrapped tight against the humidity. Dr. Rojas carried a field kit and a machete, her expression somewhere between curiosity and dread. Kane gathered us at the gate. Rules of engagement are simple. We observe, we document, we return. No heroics, no assumptions. If this is enemy activity, we report and pull back. Clear? We nodded, but I could see it in everyone's eyes. This wasn't enemy activity. This was something else. The jungle swallowed us within minutes. The canopy overhead blocked the sun, casting everything in dim green twilight. Vines hung like nooses, thick as a man's arm. The ground squelched with every step, releasing gases that made our eyes water. Moreira led, machete cutting through undergrowth with practiced strokes. He moved like the forest was an extension of himself, reading signs in broken branches and disturbed soil. Stay tight, he warned. Jungle doesn't forgive mistakes. We pushed west, following Sparks's coordinates. The silence continued. No birds, no insects, not even the rustle of small animals fleeing our approach. Just our breathing, our footsteps, and the distant pulse of that transmission bleeding through Sparks's portable receiver clipped to his vest. After an hour, Harper raised his fist. We froze. He pointed ahead, and I saw it. Shapes in the undergrowth. Tall, thin, evenly spaced. At first, I thought they were trees. Then my vision adjusted. They were structures. Wooden poles, maybe 10 feet high, arranged in a circle around a clearing. Vines covered them, but underneath I could see carvings, symbols. Not tribal, not military, just geometric patterns that hurt to look at too long. In the center of the circle sat a mound of earth, perfectly round, topped with stones arranged in concentric rings. Dr. Rojas moved forward slowly, eyes wide. This isn't natural. Kane scanned the perimeter. Umuj? She knelt, brushing soil from one of the stones. Hard to say, months, maybe years, but the vegetation growth suggests it's been undisturbed for a while. Moreira circled the poles, face grim. This is old magic, older than the tribes I know. We shouldn't be here. Kane ignored him. Sparks, signal strength? Sparks checked his receiver, face pale. Stronger, much stronger. Whatever's broadcasting, it's close, real close. I felt it then, a vibration in my chest like standing too near a subwoofer. The heartbeat transmission wasn't just sound anymore. It was pressure, physical and wrong, pushing against my rib cage from the inside. Harper grimaced, pressing a hand to his sternum. Dr. Rojas swayed slightly, eyes unfocused. Captain, I said, voice tight, we should pull back. Kane's jaw worked. I could see the calculation behind his eyes. Orders versus instinct. Protocol versus survival. Finally, he nodded. Mark this location. We're returning to base for additional equipment and personnel. Relief flooded through me, but as we turned to leave, Dr. Rojas gasped. She was staring at the mound, hands shaking. There's something in the soil. Bones, a lot of bones. Kane's hand went to his sidearm. What kind? She crouched, digging carefully with gloved hands. When she pulled the first fragment free, my stomach dropped. It was a rib bone, human-sized, but the structure was wrong. Too porous, too light, with ridges that didn't match any anatomy I'd seen. She kept digging, pulling more pieces free. A femur with joints that bent wrong, vertebrae with too many articulation points, a skull fragment with eye sockets positioned at an angle that made my head hurt. This isn't human, she whispered. But it's not animal either. It's something else. Something in between. The vibration in my chest intensified. The heartbeat sounds grew louder, no longer coming from Spark's receiver, but from the mound itself. Isern's fall. The stones on top began to hum, resonating with the transmission. Moreira backed away, weapon raised, eyes wide with recognition. "We need to leave," he said urgently. Now Kane didn't argue. "Move out, double time." We ran, the jungle pressing closer, vines reaching like fingers, roots rising to trip us. Behind us, the humming grew into a roar, and the ground trembled beneath our boots. I didn't look back. None of us did. But as we crashed through the undergrowth, one thing was clear. Whatever we'd found, it wasn't meant to be discovered. And the signal, the impossible signal, was only the beginning. The discovery, something older than the jungle. The jungle didn't let us go easily. Every step back toward the base felt like a struggle against something unseen, as if the forest itself was reluctant to release us from its grip. The air grew heavier, the silence more oppressive, and the sense of being watched intensified with every passing minute. Even the most hardened among us felt it, a primal warning, a whisper in the blood that said we'd crossed a line that should have been left undisturbed. When we finally stumbled out of the undergrowth and into the harsh perimeter lights of the base, we were soaked in sweat, mud, and fear. Captain Kane wasted no time. He ordered a full lockdown, every man accounted for, every weapon checked and loaded. The base, which had always felt temporary and exposed, now seemed like a fragile lifeboat adrift in a sea of ancient, hostile green. The jungle pressed in on all sides, and the memory of that mound, those impossible bones, and the pulsing heartbeat haunted every corner. Dr. Roja Llamas disappeared into the medical bay, clutching her field kit and the bone fragments she'd collected. Her face was pale, her hands shaking, but her eyes burned with a kind of desperate curiosity. She began her analysis immediately, setting up microscopes and chemical tests, scribbling notes in a frantic, looping script. The rest of us tried to settle back into routine, but there was no routine left. The jungle's silence had followed us, seeping into the base, making every sound, every footstep, every whispered conversation feel like a violation. Sparks, who had always been the most level-headed among us, now seemed haunted. He kept fiddling with the radio equipment, trying to block the frequency, but the signal was everywhere. It bled through the walls, vibrated in the metal struts, and seemed to pulse in time with our own heartbeats. Moreira, the guide who had always respected the jungle's boundaries, spent hours in his bunk, rosary clutched tight, lips moving in silent prayer. Harper took up position in the watchtower, scanning the jungle through his scope, but there was nothing to see, just endless, unmoving green. As the hours dragged on, Dr. Rojas's findings began to trickle in. The bones, she explained, were unlike anything in the medical literature. They were human in size, but the structure was all wrong, too light, too porous, with articulation points that didn't match any known species. The DNA analysis was even stranger. Human markers were present, but so were sequences that didn't belong to any animal on record. It was as if the bones belonged to something that had started as human, but had been changed, reshaped by forces or processes we couldn't begin to understand. The implications were staggering. If the mound was a burial site, it wasn't for any tribe or animal known to science. It was something older, something that predated the jungle itself. The geometric patterns carved into the poles and stones were another mystery. Aurora Rojas photographed and cataloged them, running them through databases of indigenous art, military codes, even mathematical models. Nothing matched. The patterns seemed to defy logic, twisting in on themselves, forming shapes that made your eyes ache if you stared too long. Some of the men started to complain of headaches, nosebleeds, and strange dreams after looking at the photos. But the most disturbing discovery came late that night. The heartbeat sound, which had faded after we left the clearing, began to return. Not through the radios, but through the very walls of the base. It was faint at first, a low vibration you could feel more than hear. But as the night deepened, it grew stronger, pulsing through the metal, the concrete, even the air itself. The men grew restless, snapping at each other over minor slights, jumping at shadows, unable to sleep. Some claimed to hear voices whispering in the static, promising peace, rest, understanding. Kane called an emergency meeting in the comm room. The air was thick with tension, every man on edge. Dr. Rojas presented her findings, her voice trembling but determined. Whatever we found out there, it's not just a relic. It's active, it's broadcasting, and it's affecting us physically, psychologically. The bones, the patterns, the signal, they're all connected. I think we're dealing with some kind of organism or network of organisms that uses sound to communicate, maybe even to control. The room fell silent. No one wanted to say what we were all thinking, that we might already be infected, changed by our exposure to the mound and its signal. Moreira broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. There are stories, old stories, about things in the jungle that can take you over. Spirits, curses, things that walk in the skin of men but aren't men anymore. My grandmother used to say, if you hear the call, you run. You don't look back. Kane's jaw tightened. We're not running, not yet. We need answers. We need to know what we're dealing with. He ordered increased patrols, doubled the guard on the perimeter, and instructed Sparks to keep monitoring the frequency, no matter how much it cost him. The rest of us tried to hold ourselves together, but the sense of dread only grew. That night, the jungle came alive in a new way, and the fog rolled in, thick and unnatural, curling over the razor wire and seeping through every crack and vent. The heartbeat grew louder, shaking dust from the ceiling, rattling the glass in the windows. The motion sensors triggered, alarms blaring, but when we checked the monitors, there was nothing, just empty jungle and swirling mist. Some of the men began to act strangely, standing motionless at the gates, eyes glazed, lips moving in silent conversation with something only they could hear. It was as if the base itself was under siege, not by an enemy we could see, but by something older, something that had been waiting beneath the jungle for centuries. The mound, the bones, the patterns, they were just the surface. The real threat was deeper, hidden in the earth, in the air, in the very fabric of the place. And as the fog thickened and the heartbeat grew louder, we realized the truth. We hadn't discovered anything. We'd been discovered. The jungle was no longer just a backdrop to our mission. It was the mission. And whatever was out there, whatever had built the mound and carved the patterns and left those impossible bones, it was awake now, watching, waiting, and it wanted us to listen. But the worst was yet to come, because the signal wasn't just calling to us, it was changing it. And soon we would learn just how far its reach could go. The invasion, the jungle fights back. The first sign that the jungle was no longer just watching us, but moving against us, came quietly. It was the silence. Not the peaceful hush of a world at rest, but a suffocating, unnatural stillness that pressed against the base like a physical weight. The birds, the insects, even the wind seemed to have vanished, leaving only the relentless, pulsing heartbeat that now vibrated through every wall, every floor, every bone in our bodies. It was as if the jungle itself had drawn a breath and was holding it, waiting for something to break. Inside the base, the tension was unbearable. Men who had once joked and argued now moved in silence, eyes darting to every shadow, every flicker of movement. The fog outside had thickened, curling over the razor wire and seeping through the smallest cracks, bringing with it a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. The air inside felt heavy, charged with static, and every breath tasted faintly of metal and rot. The heartbeat was everywhere, sometimes so loud it drowned out conversation. Sometimes so faint you wondered if it was just your own pulse echoing in your ears. Sparks, who had been monitoring the radio frequencies, was the first to notice the change. "Captain," he called out over the comms, his voice tight with fear. "The signal's back, but it's not coming from outside anymore. It's coming from our own equipment." Kane's reply was immediate and sharp. "Shut it down. Everything non-essential. Now." But it didn't matter. Even as the radios powered down, the heartbeat continued, pulsing through the walls, vibrating in the metal struts, resonating in our bones. And underneath it, those voices, closer now, almost forming words in a language none of us recognized, but all of us somehow understood. They were calling, inviting, promising something we couldn't name but desperately wanted. I tried to shake off the fog that was settling over my thoughts, but it was like trying to swim through syrup. Beside me, one of the guards, a young private named Mills, lowered his rifle slowly, his eyes glazed, staring toward the jungle. "Mills," I snapped, trying to break through whatever trance had taken hold. He didn't respond, just stood there, swaying slightly, lips moving soundlessly. I grabbed his shoulder and he jerked like I'd hit him with a jolt of electricity. His eyes cleared, terror flooding in. "I heard them," he whispered. "They were inside my head, telling me to open the gate." Before I could respond, the motion sensors screamed. Every alarm on the perimeter triggered at once, red lights flashing in sequence. But when I looked at the monitors, there was nothing. No heat signatures, no movement, just empty jungle and fog. Kane's voice boomed over the comms. "All personnel, defensive positions. Harper, what do you see?" Harper's reply was tight, strained. "Nothing, sir. No visual contact, but the fog's moving wrong. It's flowing toward us against the wind." I raised my rifle, scanning the perimeter. The fog thickened, pressing against the razor wire, curling through the gaps, and within it, shapes. Tall, thin, moving with that same mechanical stiffness I'd seen in the clearing. But these weren't soldiers. They were something else entirely. Hierro Rojas's voice cut through the comms, breathless and terrified. "Captain, the bones, they're not fossils. They're fresh, days old at most. And the cellular structure, it's human DNA mixed with something I can't identify. Something that shouldn't exist." Kane's voice stayed level, but I heard the edge underneath. "Meaning?" Hierro Rojas hesitated, her voice trembling. "Meaning whatever made those bones is alive, and it's been taking people, changing them." The fog reached the first building. Lights inside flickered and died. Screams erupted over the comms, then cut short. Kane barked orders, deploying teams to every entry point. But the fog moved faster, flowing through vents and under doors, bringing that heartbeat sound with it. I backed toward the comm building. Mills beside me, both of us firing into the fog. Muzzle flashes lit up shapes, silhouettes that jerked and twitched but didn't fall. They moved closer, arms reaching, mouths open in silent screams that mirrored the voices in the transmission. Then Mills stopped shooting, his rifle clattered to the ground. He turned toward the fog, face slack, and started walking. I grabbed him, but his strength was inhuman. He threw me off like I weighed nothing and kept walking. The fog swallowed him in seconds. His scream lasted longer. "Fall back!" Kane roared. "Everyone to the comm room now!" We scrambled, boots slipping on wet metal, the fog chasing us. Moreira dragged a wounded soldier, face set in grim determination. Harper fired from the rear, every shot precise but useless. Dr. Rojas ran beside me, clutching her field kit, eyes wild. We sealed the comm room door, stacking equipment against it. 8 of us remained: Kane, Moreira, Harper, Sparks, Dr. Rojas, me, and 2 privates I didn't know well. Outside, the base fell silent. No screams, no gunfire, just the heartbeat growing louder, shaking dust from the ceiling. Sparks worked frantically at the console, trying to raise anyone outside the base. Nothing but static in that transmission. Words almost forming now, syllables that made my teeth ache. Kane pulled us into a tight circle. "Situation is critical. Comms are down. Extraction is impossible until dawn. We hold this position and pray." Moreira shook his head. "Prayer won't stop this. We woke something old. Then we put it back to sleep," Kane said flatly. Dr. Rojas spoke up, voice shaking. "The bones, the signal, the fall, it's all connected. This isn't supernatural, it's biological. Some kind of organism that affects neurological function, uses sound to hunt, to control." "Can we kill it?" Kane asked. She hesitated. "Maybe fire might work, or severing its connection to the mound. But someone would have to go back out there." Kane's face hardened. "Then that's what we'll do. At first light, when we would return to that clearing, we would destroy the mound and anything attached to it." No one argued, but I could see it in their eyes. The same thing I felt. We weren't going to make it to dawn. Whatever was outside, it wasn't going to wait. The heartbeat pulsed harder, and the door began to groan. Something was pushing against it, something strong. The metal bent inward, rivets popping one by one. We raised our rifles, but my hands shook because through the gap forming in the door, I saw them, the shapes from the foam. Dozens of them, faces pale and wrong, eyes clouded, mouths moving in time with the heartbeat. And at the front, still in his uniform, was Mills. His head tilted back at an impossible angle, jaw slack. But his eyes, God, his eyes were aware, trapped, screaming silently from inside a body that wasn't his anymore. Kane's voice cut through the panic. Hold the line. Whatever happens, we hold the line. But I knew deep down where instinct lived that holding wasn't going to be enough, because the transmission wasn't trying to break in. It was already inside our heads, inside our bones, inside the very air we breathed. And when I looked around that room at the faces of soldiers trying desperately to stay human, I saw it. The glaze creeping over their eyes, the sway in their stance, the lips beginning to move soundlessly. We weren't defending against the transmission. We were becoming it. And somewhere in the jungle, in that clearing with the mound and the bones, something ancient and patient waited, because it knew what we were just beginning to understand. The signal wasn't a call for help. It was a call to join. And once you heard it, really heard it, you couldn't unhear it. You could only answer the desperate stand. The comm room became our last island of sanity, a bunker of flickering lights and desperate hope as the world outside dissolved into fog and madness. The pounding on the door was relentless, a rhythm that matched the heartbeat now pulsing through every wall, every floor, every one of us. Each blow sent shudders through the metal, dust drifting from the ceiling, the wells groaning under the strain. We knew it was only a matter of time before the barrier gave way and the things that had once been our friends poured in. Inside, the air was thick with fear and sweat. Sparks sat slumped against the console, hands clamped over his ears, blood seeping between his fingers. The transmission had finally broken through whatever mental barrier he'd been holding, and now his mouth moved in time with the voices, syllables spilling out in a chorus that wasn't his own. Dr. Rojas knelt beside him, her face pale and drawn, trying to reach the man beneath the noise. "We need to get him out of here," she whispered. "If the transmission takes full hold, he'll lead them right to us." "There is no us anymore," one of the privates said flatly, his eyes glazing over. "Don't you hear it? They're calling us home." Kane spun, weapon raised. "Private, stand down." But the private just smiled, dropped his rifle, and walked toward the door. The infected outside parted, letting him through like he'd always belonged. He turned back once, that terrible smile still fixed on his face, then disappeared into the fog. "Seal it," Kane roared. We slammed the inner security door, a reinforced steel barrier designed to withstand explosives. It shut with a hydraulic hiss, cutting off the infected. But the heartbeat continued, vibrating through metal, through concrete, through bone. And underneath, Sparks kept speaking in that chorus of voices, words almost forming now. Kane grabbed him by the vest, shaking hard. "Corporal, report. Give me a status report." Sparks's eyes rolled back, then forward, focusing on Kane with an expression that wasn't quite human anymore. "The source isn't the mound is just amplification. The source is beneath, miles beneath, something old, something waiting." "Waiting for what?" Dr. Rojas asked, voice tight. Sparks's head tilted, neck bending at an angle that made my stomach turn. "For us, it's been calling for decades. Every military installation within 500 miles, every research station, every village, sending the signal, waiting for enough minds to open the door." Kane released him, face hard. "What door?" But Sparks just laughed, a broken sound that overlapped with dozens of other voices. Then his eyes cleared for just a moment, the real Sparks surfacing. "Sir, kill me, please, before it uses me to..." The transmission surged and Sparks seized, body arching. When he straightened, the awareness was gone. Just that terrible smile and the voices pouring from his throat. Kane raised his sidearm, hands steady despite everything. One shot, clean. Sparks dropped, the voices cutting off mid-syllable. Silence hit us like a physical blow. Then the pounding started again. Dozens of fists hammering against the security door, rhythmic and relentless. The metal groaned but held, for now. "How long?" Kane asked, voice flat. Harper checked the door mechanism. "Doors rated for 24 hours under sustained assault, but that assumes normal force. These things," he trailed off, watching the metal begin to buckle. 6 hours, Moreira said quietly. "Maybe less." Kane surveyed our remaining group, 5 of us now. Him, me, Moreira, Harper, and Dr. Rojas against 30-plus infected soldiers and whatever else lurked in that jungle. The math didn't work. It never had. "Rojas," Kane said, "you mentioned fire. Elaborate." She swallowed hard, pulling herself together. "The organism, whatever it is, uses biological matter as nodes. The bones, the bodies, they're all connected through the mycelial network in the soil like a fungal colony. Fire would disrupt the connections, potentially sever the transmission at its source." "The mound," I said. She nodded. "If we destroy it completely, burn it to ash, we might break the signal's hold on the infected." Kane's jaw worked. "Might. It's all we have." He was quiet for a long moment, listening to the pounding on the door, to the heartbeat that had become the rhythm of our prison. Finally, he looked at each of us in turn. "There's an equipment shed on the east perimeter. Contains flamethrowers, thermite charges, everything we'd need. It's 50 meters from this position through open ground, currently occupied by hostile forces." "Suicide run," Harper said bluntly. "Yes," Kane agreed. "But if even one of us reaches those supplies and gets to the clearing, we have a chance, a small chance, but more than we have sitting here." Moreira crossed himself. "I'll go. I know the jungle. I can find the clearing in the dark." "No," Kane said. "You're our guide. If the rest of us fall, you are the only one who can navigate back to civilization and warn them." He looked at Harper. "You're our best shot. You provide cover from the tower if we can reach it." Harper nodded, face grim. Kane turned to me and Dr. Rojas. "You two make the supply run. I'll draw their attention. Give you an opening." "Sir," I started. "That's an order, soldier." The pounding intensified. Cracks appeared in the door's weld points. We didn't have time to argue. Kane moved to the door controls, hand hovering over the release. "On my mark, you run. Don't look back. Don't stop. Clear?" We readied ourselves, Harper positioned at the window, rifle aimed at the tower. Dr. Rojas checked her sidearm with shaking hands. Moreira muttered one final prayer. I gripped my rifle and tried not to think about Mills's face, about that trapped awareness, screaming silently. "Mark," Kane said, and hit the release. The door opened and hell poured through. Infected surged forward, but Kane was already moving, firing full auto, drawing them toward him. He screamed, a wordless roar of defiance that cut through the heartbeat. They converged on him like moths to flame. We ran, boots hammering metal grating, lungs burning, the fog thick around us. Harper's rifle cracked from somewhere behind, precise shots dropping, infected that turned our way. But there were so many, too many. An infected soldier lunged from the fog. I fired point blank, saw the recognition in its eyes as it fell. Someone I'd shared rations with, someone whose name I couldn't remember through the panic. Rojas stumbled. I grabbed her, hauling her forward. The equipment shed emerged from the fog, door hanging open. We crashed through, slamming it behind us. Inside, racks of weapons, ammunition, and there, mounted on the wall, 2 flamethrower units and a crate of thermite charges. "Help me," De Rojas gasped, pulling a flamethrower down. Her hands fumbled with the straps. I grabbed the second unit, muscle memory taking over. Fuel tank secured, ignition system checked, pressure valve open. The weight settled across my shoulders, familiar and terrifying. Outside, gunfire continued. Kane was still fighting, still buying us time. We loaded thermite charges into our vests, as many as we could carry. Dr. Rojas found a demolition pack, timer already attached. "For the mound," she said, "in case the fire isn't enough." I nodded, unable to speak. My throat was too tight. We were going back out there, into the fog, into the infected, towards something ancient and hungry that had been calling for decades. The door shuddered. They'd found us. Dr. Rojas met my eyes, and I saw the same terror I felt reflected there. But underneath, something else, determination. We'd heard the transmission. We'd felt it pulling at our minds, but we hadn't answered. Not yet. For Mills, she said quietly. For all of them, I replied. We opened the door and became fire. Aftermath, the truth buried. The jungle was burning behind us, but the silence that followed was even more suffocating than the roar of the flames. We stood in the clearing, the air thick with smoke and the stench of scorched earth, watching the last of the infected collapse into the fire. Their bodies twisted and wrong, finally still, the terrible awareness in their eyes fading as the flames consumed them. The mound cracked and caved in, the stones glowing red hot, the geometric patterns warping and melting into slag. The heartbeat that had haunted us for days stuttered, faltered, and then mercifully stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of our own ragged breathing and the distant crackle of burning wood. Dr. Rojas dropped to her knees, sobbing, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold her field kit. I stood over her, numb, the weight of the flamethrower pressing into my shoulders, my mind refusing to process what we just survived. The jungle, so recently alive with impossible threats, now seemed empty, hollowed out by the violence we'd unleashed. Harper's voice crackled through the comms, weak but alive. Tower secured. You've got a clear path west. Kane's down, but he took at least 15 with him. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Kane, the man who'd held us together, who'd bought us the time we needed, was gone. There was no time to grieve. We moved, following the path he'd cleared with his life, boots crunching over blackened earth and shattered bone. Moreira's voice came through next, guiding us with calm precision. I'm tracking you. When you hit the jungle, follow the red marker lights. I'm laying them from the tower position. The markers glowed faintly in the gloom, chemical light sticks hanging from branches, leading us deeper into the green hell. The fog was lifting, the oppressive silence giving way to the distant calls of birds and the rustle of small animals returning to a world that had been theirs long before we arrived. We reached the perimeter fence, the gate hanging open, torn from its hinges. Beyond was darkness and fog and the jungle that had been silent for days. Dr. Rojas reloaded her flamethrower, her hands steady now, shock overriding fear. I checked my fuel gauge, half a tank left, maybe enough to reach the clearing, maybe enough to burn it all. Stay close, I told her. If we get separated, we won't, she interrupted, her voice hard. Because if we do, we're both dead. Fair point. We stepped into the jungle and the transmission hit us like a wave. Stronger here, so much stronger. Words almost formed in our heads, promises of peace, of rest, of finally understanding. I bit down hard on my tongue, using pain to anchor myself. Dr. Rojas whimpered but kept moving. The red markers appeared, leading us through the undergrowth. Every shadow a potential threat, but nothing attacked. The jungle remained empty, watching, waiting. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, we reached the clearing. The poles stood as before, but now they pulsed with bioluminescence, glowing pale blue in the darkness. The mound had grown, twice the size it had been, covered in those same geometric patterns. And the bones, God, there were so many bones now, scattered around the base, fresh and gleaming. Dr. Rojas knelt, examining them with her light. These are from our men, from tonight. The organism works fast, converts organic matter into building material. For what, I asked, though I dreaded the answer. She pointed at the mound. For that, it's not a mound, it's a structure, a gateway. I looked closer and saw she was right. The stones on top weren't random. They formed an opening, a hole leading down into darkness. And from that hole came the heartbeat, so loud now it made my vision swim. Thermite charges, Dr. Rojas said, all business. We plant them around the perimeter, set the timer, then burn everything above ground. The combination should collapse the structure and seal the opening. And if it doesn't, she met my eyes, then we're already dead. We moved fast, planting charges at the base of each pole, around the mound, anywhere the ground looked disturbed. The transmission screamed in our heads now, no longer calling, but demanding. My hands shook so hard I nearly dropped a charge. Dr. Rojas caught it, finished the placement, her face set in grim concentration. As I placed the final charge, movement caught my eye. Figures emerging from the jungle, not infected soldiers. These were different, taller, thinner, with proportions that weren't quite human. The source material for those bones, the things that had been changed so completely, they weren't people anymore. Just vessels for the transmission. "We're out of time," Dr. Rojas said, setting the demolition timer. 60 seconds. "That's not enough time to get clear," I said. "I know." We stood there, flamethrowers raised as the figures closed in. 20, maybe 30 of them, moving with that same jerking puppet motion. But their faces, twisted and wrong, still held recognition, still held the memory of who they'd been. One of them was Mills, or what Mills had become. His body stretched, bones elongated, kin pulled tight over a frame that stood nearly 8 feet tall. But his eyes, clouded and distant, still held that trapped awareness. "I'm sorry," I whispered. Then I pulled the trigger and we became fire once more. The flamethrowers roared, consuming the figures, consuming the poles, consuming everything. The heat was immense, driving us back, but we kept firing, kept burning until our fuel tanks ran dry. The timer hit 0. The thermite charges detonated in sequence. White-hot chemical fire that made our flames look like candles. The poles collapsed, the mound cracked, and the hole, that terrible opening into darkness, sealed shut with molten earth. The heartbeat stopped, just stopped. Silence crashed over us, so sudden and complete it felt like deafness. The figures that were still moving collapsed, strings finally cut. The fog began to lift, pulled away by a morning wind we hadn't felt in days. Dr. Rojas dropped to her knees, sobbing. I stood there, numb, watching the clearing burn. We'd done it. We'd actually done it. Harper's voice crackled through comms, shaky with relief. "I see smoke. You guys alive?" "Yeah," I managed. "We're alive." "Morera's on his way to you. Toke finally broke through the interference. Extraction inbound. ETA 30 minutes. 30 minutes. An eternity in this place." But as I looked around the burning clearing at the collapsed structure and the sealed hole, I felt something I hadn't felt in days. Hope. The transmission was broken. The infected were free, or at least their suffering had ended. Morera crashed through the undergrowth, face streaked with tears and soot. He stared at the ruins, crossed himself 3 times, then pulled us both into a crushing embrace. "You did it. You actually did it." "Kane did it," I said quietly. "He bought us the time." We stood there, 3 survivors in a burning jungle, waiting for the helicopters that would take us away from this nightmare. But even as the rotors grew loud overhead, even as we lifted away from the canopy, I knew something true and terrible. We hadn't destroyed the transmission. We'd only severed one node, one connection in a network that spanned miles, maybe hundreds of miles. Beneath the Amazon, something old and patient still waited, still called. And one day someone else would answer. But that day wasn't today. Today, we'd won. We'd survived, and that would have to be enough. The final battle, sealing the source. The world outside the jungle felt unreal, like a half-remembered dream. For weeks after extraction, the 3 of us, Morera, Dr. Rojas, and I, were kept in isolation. Interrogated by men in suits who never gave their names. They asked the same questions over and over, as if repetition could force the truth to change. "What did you see? What did you hear? Are you experiencing any unusual symptoms?" We told them everything, again and again, until the words lost their meaning and the memories blurred at the edges. But I could see it in their eyes and the way they looked at us when they thought we weren't watching. They didn't believe us. Or worse, they believed us but didn't want to. The official report labeled it a hostile engagement with unknown guerrilla forces. Chemical weapons were theorized. Mass hallucination from jungle toxins. The bodies we'd lost were listed as combat casualties, honored and buried with full military rights. The base was evacuated, dismantled, erased from every map. Operation Night Harvest never existed. We were offered medical discharges, pension packages, NDAs thick as phone books. We signed. What choice did we have? Who would believe us anyway? I tried to return to normal life, but the world had moved on without me. The city felt too quiet, the nights too long. I'd hear a rhythm in traffic and rainfall, in my own pulse, and my chest would tighten. I'd see patterns in tile floors, in wallpaper, in the way branches crossed overhead, and my vision would swim. The doctors called it PTSD. They prescribed pills that dulled the edges but never touched the core. The silence after the transmission was almost worse than the sound itself. 3 months after my discharge, Dr. Sofia Rojas reached out. A simple message. Coffee with coordinates to a diner 200 meters from my apartment. I almost didn't go. I almost convinced myself to let it die, to bury it with everything else. But something in those coordinates, that specific invitation, pulled at me. I went. She looked different, thinner, harder, with shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. We sat in a corner booth, coffee going cold between us, speaking in low voices that wouldn't carry. She'd been researching obsessively, using her university credentials to access geological surveys, military archives, satellite imagery. What she'd found made my hands shake. There are 17 sites, she said quietly, spreading printouts across the table. 17 confirmed locations across the Amazon basin where similar structures have been identified. Mounds, geometric markers, all positioned above massive underground cavities, natural caverns that extend miles deep. I stared at the images, different locations, but the patterns were identical. The same poles, the same arrangements, the same openings leading down into darkness. How long have they been there? I asked. She pulled out a carbon dating report. Some are recent, decades old at most. Others, she tapped a photo near the Peruvian border. This one dates back over 2,000 years. They've been there longer than recorded history, longer than the tribes that live there now. My stomach dropped. Then what we destroyed was one node in a network that spans the entire basin, maybe further. We cut off one finger, but the hand is still reaching. She leaned forward, voice intense. I've been tracking reports. Military installations reporting equipment failures, research stations losing personnel, villages evacuating for no documented reason. All within proximity to these sites, the transmission is still active, still calling. Have you told anyone? I asked, though I already knew the answer. She shook her head. Who would listen? The military buried it. Academic journals won't touch anything without peer review. And how do I peer review this? She laughed bitterly. I sound insane. I know I sound insane, but the data doesn't lie. I believed her. God help me, every word, because I'd felt it, stood in that clearing and understood on some primal level that we'd stumbled onto something vast, something old, something that had been waiting beneath the earth long before humans walked above it. What do you want from me? I asked quietly. She met my eyes. Help, Moreira's in. Harper. She hesitated, pain flickering across her face. Harper didn't make it. Pills 6 weeks ago. But Moreira's been tracking the sites from Brazil. He's got contacts, people who know the jungle. We're planning an expedition, private funding, small team. We go in quiet, document everything, and figure out how to shut this down permanently. You want to go back? I said, voice flat. I want to finish what Kane started. She pulled out a photo, laid it on the table. Captain Elias Kane in dress uniform, medals gleaming, face set in that iron discipline. He died buying us time to seal one site. The least we can do is make sure it wasn't for nothing. I looked at Kane's face, at the man who'd held the line when everything fell apart. Then I looked at Dr. Rojas, at the desperation and determination burning in her eyes. I thought about Mills, about Torres, about Sparks and all the others who'd answered that terrible call, about the private who'd smiled and walked into the fog, about 37 men who'd gone into the jungle and 3 who'd come back out. When, Aiden? Oh, my Then I asked. Relief flooded her face. 2 months. We need time to prepare, to gather equipment, to be ready for what we'll find. We spent the next 8 weeks training. Moreira joined us in the States, bringing detailed maps he'd drawn from memory and local reports. We studied the sites, looking for patterns, The 17 confirmed locations formed a rough sprawl, all equidistant from a central point deep in uncharted territory. None of the sites were easily accessible. Most required weeks of jungle travel. The central point was marked on no map, appearing only as blank space on satellite imagery. "That's where we go," Moreira said, tapping the center. "The source, we destroy that. Maybe we destroy them all." Maybe. That word carried so much weight because we didn't know what we'd find there. Didn't know if it could be destroyed. Didn't know if we'd come back. Harper's sister contacted me a week before departure. She'd found a letter in his effects addressed to me. I opened it with shaking hands. His handwriting was neat, precise, each word carefully chosen. The letter was short, 3 sentences that made my blood run cold. "The silence is worse than the sound. Every night I hear them calling, promising peace. By the time you read this, I'll have answered. Don't follow me." I showed Dr. Rojas. She read it twice, face pale, then carefully folded it and handed it back. "We're not following him. We're making sure no one else has to." The expedition launched in late February, just the 3 of us, traveling under tourist visas, carrying equipment hidden in camping gear. We flew into Manaus, hired a boat, and headed west along tributaries that grew narrower and darker with each passing mile. The jungle pressed close, humidity thick enough to drown in, but this time the jungle wasn't silent. Birds called, insects screamed, monkeys howled in the canopy. Normal sounds, living sounds. It took 3 weeks to reach the coordinates. 3 weeks of cutting through undergrowth, crossing rivers, avoiding villages that might ask questions. Moreira navigated like the jungle was his home, finding paths that didn't exist on any map. Dr. Rojas documented everything. Samples and measurements and observations filling notebooks. I kept watch, rifle ready, scanning for threats that might not show up until too late. The jungle changed as we approached the center point. Subtle at first, trees grew taller, thicker, with bark that felt wrong under your hand. The air tasted metallic like copper and ozone. Animal sounds faded, replaced by that oppressive stillness I remembered from the base. My chest tightened. We were close. On the 22nd day, we found it. Not a clearing like before, but a massive sinkhole easily 200 meters across, dropping straight down into darkness. Vines covered the edges, thick as anchor cables hanging into the depths. And around the perimeter, carved into stone that predated the jungle itself, were those same geometric patterns. Thousands of them, spiraling down into the pit. Dr. Rojas set up equipment, measuring depth with sonar. The readings kept going deeper and deeper until the equipment maxed out at 5 kilometers. "There's a structure down there," she said, voice shaking. "Not natural, constructed. Something massive." Moreira stared into the pit, face grim. "This is where they come from. The transmissions, the calls. This is the heart." I approached the edge, looking down. The darkness wasn't empty. Faint bioluminescence pulsed far below, that same pale blue glow from the mound. And beneath it, deeper still, something moved. Something vast. I could feel it watching us, aware of our presence, waiting to see what we would do. "We need to collapse it," Dr. Rojas said. "Bring down the walls, seal the entrance. We've got enough explosives to..." A sound interrupted her. Not the heartbeat, not the voice, just a low rumble that came from deep in the earth, vibrating up through stone, through our bones. The ground trembled, rocks skittered over the edge, disappearing into darkness. The bioluminescence flared brighter. "It knows we're here," Moreira whispered. We worked fast, placing charges around the sinkhole's perimeter, setting timers, our hands shaking with urgency and fear. The rumbling continued, growing stronger. Cracks appeared in the stone, spreading like veins. Something was rising, coming up to meet us. Dr. Rojas finished the last charge, hands bloody from rough stone. "Timer set, 15 minutes. We need to be at least a kilometer away when this goes off." We ran, crashing through undergrowth, leaping over roots, the rumbling chasing us behind. The jungle screamed, not animals, but the trees themselves, wood splitting, earth heaving. I risked a glance back and wished I hadn't. The sinkhole was expanding, walls crumbling inward. Something massive pulling itself up from the depths. I couldn't see details, just shape, just hayamam, just the terrible understanding that we'd woken something that should have stayed sleeping. The charges detonated. Even at a kilometer away, the blast wave knocked us flat. Thunder rolled across the jungle, echoing for miles. Birds exploded from the canopy in clouds of panicked flight. Then silence, heavy, complete, absolute. We waited, not daring to breathe. Minutes passed. The silence held. Finally, Moreira stood, moving back toward the blast site. We followed, weapons ready, every nerve on edge. The sinkhole was gone, collapsed completely, filled with millions of tons of earth and stone. The geometric patterns were buried, erased. The ground was still, no longer trembling. In the air, the metallic taste was fading, replaced by normal jungle humidity. "Did we do it?" I asked quietly. Dr. Rojas pulled out her equipment, scanning for electromagnetic activity. The readings were flat, normal background radiation, nothing else. No transmission, no signal, no call pulling at our minds. She looked up, tears streaking through the dirt on her face. "It's gone. We actually did it." Moreira dropped to his knees, pressing his forehead to the ground, whispering thanks to gods I didn't know. I just stood there numb, trying to process that it was over. Really over. We made camp that night near the collapsed site, taking turns on watch, but nothing came. The jungle remained alive, normal, indifferent to what we'd done. By morning, vines were already creeping over the disturbed earth, beginning the slow work of reclaiming what we'd destroyed. The journey back took 2 weeks. We moved faster without the weight of dread, without the constant anticipation of attack. When we reached civilization, Dr. Rojas made calls. Quiet conversations with people who had funded our expedition. Within a month, coordinated strikes hit the other 16 sites, sealed, collapsed, buried under tons of earth and concrete. The official story was geological instability, preventative measures against sinkhole formation. No one questioned it too deeply. 6 months later, I received a package. No return address. Inside was a recording, old reel-to-reel tape in a military surplus case. A note attached, found in Soviet archives dated 1952. "You should hear this." I played it. Through the static and age, I heard voices speaking Russian, a debriefing, soldiers describing a transmission they'd encountered in Siberia, a heartbeat sound, geometric patterns carved in permafrost, comrades who walked into the ice and didn't return. Then silence. A note in the margin translated, "Site sealed with nuclear charge. Recommend all similar anomalies receive same treatment." My hands shook as I turned off the player. They'd found them too, different locations, different times, but the same phenomenon. And they'd buried it just like we had, just like countless others probably had throughout history. Each generation stumbling onto these sites, sealing them, and hoping they'd stay sealed. But hoping wasn't enough, because as I sat there, tape recorder silent, I realized something that made my blood run cold. We'd found 17 sites in the Amazon. The Soviets had found sites in Siberia. How many more were there, and how many remained undiscovered, calling silently from beneath mountains, beneath oceans, beneath cities built unknowingly on top of them? Dr. Rojas called that night. She'd received the same tape. "We need to keep looking," she said. "Document every site, seal every opening. It's not over." She was right. It wasn't over. Maybe it never would be. But that day in the jungle, when the charges went off and the ground stopped trembling, we'd won a battle. We'd silenced one call in a chorus that spanned the planet. And sometimes that's all you can do. Fight the battles you can reach. Seal the doors you can find. Keep the darkness at bay, one site at a time. Conclusion. The warning. I think about Cain sometimes, about his iron discipline, his willingness to buy us time with his life. I think about Mills, trapped and aware as something else wore his skin. I think about Harper, who couldn't live with the silence after hearing that sound. They deserve better than to be forgotten, to have their sacrifice buried in classified files and false reports. So I'm telling you now, this story, these events, not as entertainment, not as fiction, but as a warning. Because somewhere right now, beneath your feet or across the ocean or deep in some jungle not yet mapped, they're still there, still waiting, still calling. The transmission isn't one thing, it's many things connected through networks older than our species, operating on timescales we can barely comprehend. And if you ever find yourself in a place that's too quiet, where the patterns on the walls hurt to look at, where the ground hums with rhythms that match your heartbeat, walk away. Don't investigate. Don't try to understand. Just leave and seal it behind you if you can, because some doors should never be opened. Some calls should never be answered. We survived Operation Night Harvest. 3 out of 37. Those aren't good odds. But we live to fight again, to find and seal the source, to stop the transmission at its heart. That has to count for something. That has to mean something. The jungle is quiet now where we fought. Normal quiet, full of life and sound and chaos. The mound is gone, the opening is sealed. The bones are buried under earth that will hold them for centuries. We did that. We made it right as much as it could be made right. But late at night, when the world goes still, I sometimes hear it, faint, distant, like a memory that won't fade. The heartbeat, the voices, not calling me anymore, just reminding me they're out there, waiting, patient. And I wonder how many others hear it too. How many are listening right now in the quiet hours before dawn, wondering if they should answer. Don't answer, please. Whatever you hear, whatever it promises, don't answer. Learn from Mills, from Torres, from Harper. Learn from the 34 men who didn't come home. The silence after the transmission ends is hard to bear, but it's better than the alternative. Better than becoming a vessel for something that wears your face and speaks with your voice, but isn't you anymore. This is my testimony, my warning, my memorial to the men who died in a jungle hell that officially never existed. Captain Elias Kane, Sergeant Luis Moreira made it out with me, but carries scars I can't see. Dr. Sofia Rojas fights this battle in her own way, hunting these sites with the dedication of someone who understands what's at stake. Private Neil Harper, who found peace the only way he could, and Corporal Andrew Dalton Sparks, who gave us the information we needed, even as it destroyed him. Remember them? Remember what they fought. And if you're watching this in the quiet hours, if you're alone and the silence feels heavy, know that you're not imagining it. The transmission is real. The sites are real. And somewhere, people are fighting to keep you safe from things you'll never know existed. We're still out here, still sealing doors, still fighting battles in jungles and deserts and frozen wastes. Not for glory or recognition, not for anything that will ever appear in history books, just to make sure that when you lie down at night, the silence stays silent, that the heartbeat you hear is only your own. Operation Night Harvest ended in 1967, but the war continues, and it will continue long after I'm gone. Because some things are older than us, stronger than us, patient beyond measure. All we can do is hold the line, buy time, and hope that somewhere down the centuries, someone finds a way to end this permanently. Until then, we watch, we listen, we seal the doors, and we survive. That's all I've got. That's the truth of what happened in Grid 97, in a base that never existed, during an operation that was never authorized. 37 men went in, 3 came out. The numbers speak for themselves. If you're still watching, if you made it this far, do me a favor. Look up Operation Night Harvest. You won't find it. It's been scrubbed, buried, classified beyond black. But that doesn't mean it didn't happen. That doesn't mean the threat is gone. Keep your eyes open. Stay aware. And if you ever encounter something that feels like what I've described, report it. Tell someone. Don't let it spread. We can't fight what we don't acknowledge. And the first step in winning this war is admitting it exists. The transmission is real. The sites are real, and they're waiting for the next person to stumble across them, to hear that heartbeat, to feel that pull. Don't be that person. Learn from our mistakes. Live your life. Stay safe. And whatever you do, don't answer the call. Because some stories aren't just stories. Some warnings are meant to be heeded. And some silences are the only thing standing between us and the darkness that waits beneath the world.